As I mentioned, we have Robert Ophèle, the president of Autorité des marchés financiers, the French regulator, and we have the luck of having you here today. And I'd like to understand a bit more about what you do. So I think a lot of the audience here have heard, obviously, about the AMF, but it'd be worthwhile for you to tell us more about what AMF does.
You know, in France, you have two authorities covering the financial sector. One is the ACPR, covering banks, payment institutions, and insurance. ACPR is backed by the central bank, Banque de France. And you have the AMF in charge of financial markets. And obviously, we are working closely together, especially when it comes to Fintech, because in many cases, Fintechs are covering both fields, both remit. That's
so the focus of the AMF is also looking at larger companies too, of course, I imagine. So
yes, issuers of listed securities and market participants, market infrastructures, and asset managers.
Okay, so it's a broader range that goes from retail all the way down to corporate.
Exactly.
Wonderful. So I think if we were to look at that remit, what do you consider as the most important aspect of your role? What is the most important thing that, as head of AMF, you see as your responsibility?
First of all, that's having fair markets. That's a key point. And the other is protecting the investors, being sure that they have the right information in order to make up their choice of investments. That's the two basics: fair markets and good information for investors.
So one of the things that a lot of regulators seem to perceive is that the best way to protect the end user is actually to be like a wall that covers the financial services, stops them from evolving to make sure they're constant and continuous without really thinking about evolution and growing. Do you see that as an aspect of your role? And if not, why? How can you do it differently, and what do you do differently?
It's a complex issue.
Of course. No easy questions here.
No easy questions. As a regulator, you have also to find the right balance between providing the right information, and if you overflow the investors with information, it's not appropriate. But they have to understand the riskiness and the cost of their investment choice. That's something which is key, especially in a world where financial products are evolving very rapidly.
Yeah.
There are a lot of innovation, and to some extent you can lose the investors in that domain, especially when it comes to risks and reward and costs.
It's interesting because if you speak to some of the fintechs, and if you have some of them coming through, is that they feel that the investors, the end user, has benefited more from innovation and new things rather than staying with the established. But I think in your case, you have to play the balance between engaging with the new, but also not giving away the old too quickly. Now, if you speak to both sides, and you'll see it in other panels here, there will be some startups that say that regulators are terrible and destroying their business, and you'll see some banks that say regulators are terrible, they're favoring the fintechs. So it'll be here to see how do you keep that balance? How do you make sure that that doesn't happen?
The very first thing you have to do, we have to foster innovation, but keep the right balance with investor protection.
Yeah.
And, but first of all, when you intend to foster innovation, you need to fully understand what is it about, what are these innovations. It means discussing with the project holders, understanding the project, assessing the regulatory consequences, look at if it's possible or not. In some cases, you will have to change your own regulation to allow this type of innovation. You need to move very cautiously, and but the key point is to fully understand what is at stake.
Okay. So you're saying that what makes you distinctive is an understanding of what innovation is.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So it'll be good to hear how some of the things that you do about that. I understand that you recently launched a new initiative looking at creating an innovation hub, an innovation environment. Is that one of the ways?
That was 4 years ago, actually. 4 years ago.
Not that recently, then.
4 years ago.
So can you tell us more about that and how what's happened?
So this team is meeting with Fintech project holders. If I remember well, we are now we have met more than 600 of them during these last years, and by discussing and helping them to fine-tune the project vis-à-vis the regulatory environment. Because obviously, in many cases, these project holders they are not aware of the institutional regulatory setting.
Yeah.
So you need to help them to overcome the regulatory hurdles. But in some cases, it's a challenge for us because we see that this innovation could add value to the ecosystem, but it's not allowed by the regulation. In that case, we in Europe, we have an issue because part of the regulation is a European regulation, and part of it is a national one. Yeah. And if you take the crypto domain, it's interesting because you have basically you have the currency token, utility token, securities token. When it comes to securities, especially listed securities, it's a European regulation. There is nothing we can do, just pushing for a change in the European regulation. When it comes to utility or currency tokens, or digital asset service providers, it's not covered now by the European regulation, it's under national remit. So we have tried to introduce a specific regulation in France covering these fields because we had some room for maneuver. We do hope that at some point this will be covered by a European regulation, but we introduced something in France last year.
That's very interesting because I was going to ask you about that. What does it actually mean if you have a company that is looking at crypto and would like to find a safe regulatory environment to build my business? Would you suggest that France is a good place for them to engage?
We do hope that it's a safe environment. That was the purpose of our regulation, which is to some extent innovative in itself, also because it's based on some optionality. We proposed to people wanting to have an ICOs, for example, to ask for an optional visa from the AMF. And when it comes to digital asset service providers, depending on the services, but in some cases, you need to be registered because there are the requirements of AML,
KYC,
TF, which should be implemented. So you should be registered, but on top of that, you could ask for an optional visa, an optional license. From the IMF in that field in order to give some comfort to your customer. It's optional at this juncture.
So any cryptocurrency CEOs in the audience, should they contact you directly? They know exactly where to go, right? The AMF is the place.
It's now all the institutional regulatory and setting is ready. And let's just to give you an idea, we are expecting around 30 digital asset service provider being registered, asking for a registration this year. So if Mr. Zuckerberg was sitting there with his Libra proposition, he would find open arms for you to help him? You mean, what did you mention? Libra. Libra. No, Libra is it's Switzerland. No, am I wrong? No, Libra was let's say, that was a very welcome wake-up call to all of us, meaning that there is a business case, there is a technical possibility to have some sort of stable coin. And it triggers a reaction by central banks. And it's very welcome because when you look especially at security tokens,
yes,
it's clear that if you want to implement something like DVP, delivery versus payment, in a chain, you need a stable coin. And if it's a central bank stable coin, it's better, of course, it's safer. So they are developing, there are some project development in France, at the Banque de France, at the ECB, at the BIS, and I do hope that they will deliver something that will allow the development of security tokens, which, by the way, needs we need also to adapt the European regulation, because currently there is many impediments in this regulation for the development of security tokens, be it MiFID or CSDR, for example. So that's something.
So we can count on your support at the European level to.
We are trying to have
can
some changes.
somebody write this down? Okay, I hope the audience can have it. We have it on video now that you're supportive. And I think let me ask you a last question, which is the B word and Brexit. So there's sightings of ACPR around London quite frequently, going around and engaging with conferences and so on and so forth. I assume AMF also is looking at that as an opportunity. What are your thoughts about Brexit? Obviously, that shuts out potentially the regulated fintechs out of the European market. Is AMF making an active role in trying to find a safe home for these companies?
More than opportunity, it's a challenge for us.
Okay.
I do think, because the relationship we had with the UK in this field was very fruitful. So the challenge is to overcome the current fragmentation of the EU market. The challenge is to be more agile in our regulatory approach, and in order to develop the fintech ecosystem. When you look at the European and French fintech ecosystem, we are lacking probably some venture capital to finance them. It's easier in other parts of the world, perhaps in the UK, but obviously in the US. We need to foster that. And let me mention the commitment made by the insurance sector a couple of days ago, a week ago, in France, to invest more than 6 billion during the next 3 years in not only in fintech, but in tech startups. And fintechs are obviously part of them. So I do think we could overcome these hurdles.
Thank you very much. So we'll expect France emerging as a bigger fintech hub than it already is. Thank you very much, Mr. Ophèle. Thank you.